Namaskaram, Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. In today's presentation, which I am very honored to put in front of all of you, we are going to explore the greatness of this Bani of Sri Lalgudi Jayaraman. Bani generally means a pathway, a way to follow. Since the world of music is so vast, to be able to chart out a way to progress, a way to imagine the music, a way to present the music, we require to have some kind of a guide, a pathway, a way by which we do things, we present things. In my understanding, a Bani or a Gharana, to be loosely called a style, a playing or a singing style, represents this pathway. So this pathway, what we call a Bani, is based on 3 or 4 major factors. One is, of course, the idea of sound, whether it be on the voice or whether it be on an instrument, the idea of sound, which is a particular pathway. Then there is the idea of aesthetics. This field of aesthetics will cover so many things. How one handles the raga, what are the gamakas of the raga, what one cherishes within the raga, the values of the raga, All these come under the rubric of aesthetic. Then there is the element of creative framework, a way by which this particular pathway, artist in this pathway thinks about the music, in terms of what is of value and, in terms of virtuosity of the creativity, in terms of speed, in terms of combinations, in terms of the imagination. That's also a particular element in this pathway. And of course, fourth is the idea of the values embedded in the pathway. An approach to music essentially involves values. Values like perfection, values like honesty, values like, conveying expression, values of integrity to the composition. These are all part of values. These four frameworks are what determine, so these four criteria constitute the Bani. And it is these four criteria that finally reflect in the technique that presents the music. On an instrument, technique is very critical. These four values finally determine what roads the technique takes, in terms of fingering, in terms of bowing, and in terms of all the nuances that technique encompasses. For example, this Varnam of Lalgudi Jayaraman sir that I just presented in the raga Garuda Dhwani encapsulates all these elements. You might ask, how can one piece of music showcase or encompass a great genius's Bani? But yes, like how one sees the ocean in a drop, the ocean, the drop which you pick up from the ocean is the ocean. Similarly, a Varnam composed by Lalgudi Jayaraman sir picks up the morals, the cherished values, the technique, the creative framework, and the sound of the musician. So though I am not exactly in the pathway of the Lalgudi Bani, I have learnt a lot, I have gained a lot by listening to him from very early childhood. Though my playing now has elements of sir, it has taken different routes. That's why my playing in the Lalgudi Bani is going to be lacking in certain ways, because I am not all that grounded in it now. Even though I enjoy and learn a lot from it, technically I am actually a student of Sri Ramakrishna Sharma, who was one of the earliest students of Lalgudi sir, Jayaraman sir. So to that extent, I belong to the pathway, but not yet. So mine is a kind of a very respectful assimilation of Lalgudi sir's playing. And it might sound imitative at some points in time, because the conviction is not there. But yet, I choose to present it so that I can highlight some aspects of the aesthetics and the technical aspects of the Bani. What is a Bani? A Bani is not just a template from which you can borrow and imitate. Imitation is of not much value in art, especially in classical art. Imitation is how we begin. But then the Bani shows you a way within it, your own way within it. So when we talk of the great Banis, whether it be G&B Bani or whether it be Dhanammal Bani, we are talking about a model which guides us in our search for our own music. So the model suggests all these four criteria: technique, cherished values in the music, the creative framework, and sound. And within these, we develop our own approach to the music. Let us go to brass tacks. Let me play the Varnam and in bits and pieces and try to illustrate what I mean by all these four criteria. So the sound. Lalgudi sir had a very big sound within his mind, and that's what he tried to translate through his violin. What we call a big sound, a fat sound. So the violin comes in myriad of sound shades, and we identify the musician, the great musician, by in a small snippet, by virtue of the sound that we hear. Even in Western violin, 5 seconds is all what it takes to identify the violinists, because in terms of sound they are so unique. Now, how this sound of the violin is just as unique as each individual singer's voice. So when we listen to Muhammad Rafi, we know it is Muhammad Rafi, right? When we listen to Aryakudi, we know it's Aryakudi. When we listen to M.S. Subbulakshmi, we know it is M.S. Subbulakshmi, correct? It's the identification of the peculiarity of the sound, the speciality of the sound. So with respect to Lalgudi sir's sound, the sound is very thick and fat. It's very substantial. It's not fine and delicate and shy, right? So that sound of bigness is what characterizes Lalgudi sir's playing. So if I were to just play, say, one line from a small alapana in Bahudari. So I shall present a small snippet of a alapana in Lalgudi sir's playing style. I do this imitation with all respect. I know it is not the correct thing to do, but to illustrate certain points of his Bani, his sound, I have no other choice. Because if I play example of it, it won't suffice. This thickness of sound. The big fat sound, nice digging into the strings. An exact contrast of it, the softest and subtlest tonalities, like so the drama that this contrast of sound creates is what is magical about Lalgudi sir's sound. From the most delicate to the fattest, biggest sound, that range, that dynamic range, that tonal range, he played with it. He reveled in that. This theater of the violin through his sound is what was his speciality. So if you are in following the Bani, you have to develop that tonal and dynamic range in your bowing, and the beautiful movement from one to the other, which it's not a contrived kind of loud and soft. It's a flow of the same, right? So that is the first characteristic in terms of sound. I presume he played with a very heavy bow, and that is why the sinking in of the sound was very pronounced. Many of these things also depend upon the instrument. But then the sound of the person is something which is personal. So I can very, very confidently say that the sound of Lalgudi sirs would have been there in every instrument that he played on. Right? Because it is the personal sound which translates into bow pressure, the way you draw the sound out of the string and all those things. Right? So the fatness of sound is what is the most striking part of his playing. And like I said, the contrast. The bow pressure which will deepen and soften and deepen and soften. You know, if I were to take the first line of the Varnam itself. So, that Gariga, the fatness of that Gandhara. So to get this in flow on your bow arm is the challenge for that sound. Right? The other thing about his sound is that it was egged on by a very vibrant and a very poignant vibrato. Vibrato is the way we, on a stringed instrument, when you vibrate a note position, it gives a little more dynamic power to the note. So, it's not just a shivering of the fingers, it requires a lot of strength and cultivation of a vibrato. Not only on the long notes, but even in the passing notes, he had a very powerful sense of vibrato. What this vibrato does is that it sustains and gives more continuity to the sound. Right? And it also gives a pronunciation, a very pronounced effect to the sound. So, for example, if I were to play so that kind of pronunciation for the sound. So the vibrato extends the sound. The other element of his sound was that in many ways he liked the sound of two violins. Right? And it is very natural that in a lot of his solo playing, earlier on he played with his sister. You know, only the violin, the two violins. So even when playing alone, he developed that idea of a two violin sound, which means two strings playing at the same time. Right? For example, very simple things. Of two strings together, so the shadja becomes very is as if two violins are playing, or more than two violins. So it gives an impression of a duet in one instrument. This he demonstrates in so many different nuances in his playing. The idea of two strings being sounded simultaneously. Even in sangadis where there are fast sangadis, one string will be playing like a drone. So, you find that two strings are sounding at the same time. So the drama in the sound is what characterizes the theatre in the sound, is what characterizes his playing. That is why he kept the listeners on the edge of the seats. So it was not just the music, it was the theatrical element in the music. He made sure that at every juncture you would be glued in attention. That is what theatre is. Theatre is where you are sucked into the whole process, right? Of a plot unfolding, of different characters coming in, right? So all this he incorporated into his sound. There were certain things which Lalgudi sir revelled in musically. Let me play a little bit and then you will get an idea. Within his compositions, within his manodharma, you will find these blossoming like flowers of gold. You know, generally the idea of patterns, creating patterns, replicating patterns in different parts of the octave, repetition with variation, the idea of what we call poruttam. Poruttam means falling into place very appropriately. You know, poruttam is also a patterning, a kind of a way of a tala structure in Kalpanaswara, which he revelled in, right? So things like that we will try to explore a little bit and see. These are the things which he revelled in, and hence they formed an important part of his Bani, right? So let us, I will highlight them as I play. An alapna in Abhogi, for example. So these variations coming and landing on Dhaivata. So having a theme and varying it endlessly, giving the listener a sense of both groundedness in a particular theme as well as constantly varying it and the joy that arises out of it. This he used to, in his Manodharma, you will find a lot of this particular approach to the phrase. The repetition of a particular gamaka, exaggerating it to prolong the effect. For example, right, that ga, that is the normal way. But by exaggerating it and making it larger than life, you know, right? So that is part of the aesthetic that he chose, to exaggerate certain things. Even a simple jaru, he will exaggerate its effect. Right? So you punch out the sa and then you fade it out so quickly. That sa to da jaru is exaggerated in terms of its dynamic range. Sometimes he will exaggerate the plain note. Right? So the Gandhara the listener's attention is drawn to that Gandhara. You know? So within a phrase, he will also sometimes exaggerate and emphasize the Anuswara. Anuswara are the grace notes. Like So that the madhyama in that ga, re, ga, so the emphasis on that ma. So it creates a certain additional theatre. Right. So this exaggeration and giving emphasis for the anuswara also was a very important part of his aesthetic. So there are many such small things which make his playing very distinct. Like I said, patterning or what are called sequences. These kind of phrases, So the dagari, and then replicating it in a different register. So that the correspondence is between Rishabha, Devata and Rishabha again. So doing it in 3 points and mirroring the same phrase in those regions. You can find this in a lot of his compositions, in the Varnas and Tilanas. I spoke about Poruttam, how a particular mathematical calculation and the melody flow into the beginning of the composition as if it is seamless. This marked a lot of his Kalpanaswara as well as so many of his compositions. You can see this. For example, the last variation of his, when he played the Mohana Kalyani Tilana. So the sari ga pari ga pada sani pa magari, right? Taka tajanudim tanadhirana. So takata is the theme. So he is able to do taka tajanudim. So it's a particular musical approach of the continuity being lent, of the cyclicity of the composition being established, right? So it's as if the ending folds into the beginning of the composition. So this is a value, this is a particular musical aesthetic, and he revelled in this. You will find him 1,000 variations by which he will represent this, what we call Poruttam, in his compositions and also in his Kalpanaswara. The other thing he revelled in is what I call theme and variations. He will establish a theme and then he will vary it endlessly. This is part of the creative framework, right? For example, in the same Tilana, in the beginning of it, these are all simple things, but sometimes they go unnoticed. When we have to understand a great artist's thinking process, we have to go back and dissect it into very small beautiful categories by which you understand how this great person's mind is working, and then some of the secrets of the Bani emerge from that. So even the two brikas here are a matter of parallelism. That is also mirroring. Then That is the first variation, the ending variation. Then second variation. Right? All different endings. And of course the last ending of a flurry of notes. So he was a master of this concept of theme and variation. Theme and variation is slightly different from our concept of Sangati. In theme and variation, what happens is that the variations can be they can depart from the male melody in a very big way. A Sangati generally has a particular integrity to the original met, right? They are small variations. But here, this last variation is out of the blue. It is a very fantastic variation, a virtuosic variation. Even in terms of very small things, like the peculiarity or the individuality of his bricca. It's a very quick, lightning kind of a bricca. So for a violinist, you will know that to get that crispness is a matter of even both the left hand as well as the right hand. Like, so the fingers have to strike the fingerboard with a lot of strength, and the bow too has to punch out. Is what is called in Western violin, it's called a Martell Stroke, where there is a kind of a sudden emphasis. Right. So he was a master of the bow. The bow he used to paint colors of tone and to create a very wide dynamic range. So though he, this is with all respect I say, though he probably didn't hold the bow in the most optimum way, but still it doesn't matter, because whatever sounds he wanted, the range of sounds that he generated were all possible. In terms of, the sudden way he used to emphasize a note, what is generally called a sforzando, or the ease with which he went from very soft to very loud, what is called pianissimo to fortissimo. These kind of bowing techniques probably he heard and absorbed a lot of these things from Western violin technique also. So for example, in the Sindhu Bhairavi Tilana, how he used to punch out certain notes in the middle of a flow. They are what is called sforzando. So it's not just, it's just that one note which will be loud and pronounced. For example, I shall try something which I have not heard him do, but this is what, when you follow a Bani, you are just taking the value and you are free to do it somewhere else or to experiment with that concept. So you are only taking you are not imitating the great man's playing, you are assimilating what is the core of it and then trying to implement in your own way of thinking about the music. Like in the Charana of the Sindhu Bhairavi Tilana, that Tilana, right? In that there is one variation where he'll punch out the So in that dhanisa, 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 the sforzando of control of the bow, first time you can stress the dha, second time you can stress the ni, third time you can stress the sa. Right? So I'm exaggerating it, but the musical value of where to place emphasis is also a part of the creative framework of the artist. So Lalgudi sir teaches us that this is an aesthetic, which is a very exciting aesthetic. It creates that sense of theatre. In many ways, Lalgudi sir developed a way of playing which was very effective and efficient. So the ease of certain difficult sangadis, the way he interpreted the sound of it and presented on his violin, give us insights into how efficient can one be in one's musicianship. For example, difficult phrases on the instrument, he simplified them by just retaining the effect of it and not necessarily taking it the whole way. I shall demonstrate that in terms of efficiency. I am sure Lalgudi sir was a very big fan of Nagaswaram Vidwan T. and Rajaratnam Pillai. Now this way of efficiency of playing, of realizing notes, especially in high speeds, one sees in Rajaratnam sir also. You know, the flourishes which move at a breakneck speed, not necessarily all the notes are heard very clearly, but the effect of the speed is registered. Yeah. So shortcuts in terms of gamakas create the illusion of certain gamakas. That makes for efficiency. For example, if I take the raga Bhairavi, now the incompleteness of the gamaka, that's all you hear. Ga, you don't hear the whole Gandhara. That's all you hear. This is very efficient and it retains the magic of the full Ga. That is how I would usually play, correct? The full phrase. Whereas, so Ga, Ga, it disappears into nothingness. Right? Ni pada ni sagari. That's all is required. It's very efficient. Not the whole gamaka. That is not there. Now this way of realizing the gamaka, but by just giving its presence and not necessarily the whole thing, is very, very useful and is very effective and efficient when we play fast phrases. So, for example, in Bhairavi itself, if you take that phrase, now the Riga Mapa, that is the full phrase, right? But where Lalgudi sir used to create the illusion. By not necessarily doing the whole gamaka, you know, by just indicating it. Padani sagari. For example, the nishada and the madhyama. That is a phrase. Whereas in Lalgudi sir's way of playing, there will be an efficient way by which you can play that. You see how that a short form of the gamaka. For example, in that phrase, the nishada and the madhyama are only is suggested. It's only a suggestion, but that seems to be enough for Bhairavi to be there. You know, So these kind of efficiencies of his fingering, where sometimes the last note also, the Rishabha is just suggested, right? It's not, that is the way of the correct phrase. But then an efficient way of presenting the same phrase in Bhairavi, the Rishabha is only suggested. That is also the aesthetic, where you don't enunciate the full phrase, but you leave it to the listener to figure out that sound. Even if the Rishabha is just an indication, the whole Rishabha registers in the mind of the listener. So efficiency is also a very great hallmark of his playing. In so many areas you will find that he seems to play it very easily. Difficult phrases. But then when you go a little into the technique of it, you realize that this is something which he has developed for himself. In terms of making a difficult phrase and using his intelligence of approximation to render it equally effective, but not necessarily as difficult. That's also an artistic process. And a significant part of his style of ideation was that he would repeat a phrase many times. For example, any raga, there are certain phrases that Lalgudi sir came up with which have become part of the mainstream of Manodharma. If I were to take, for example, he had a way of rocking the swarasthana. It's not a vibrato, right? In Madhyamavati, also the glossing of certain phrases to make them more beautiful. For example, this phrase, but he used to gloss over it. So it's not clear, but then that adds a different kind of a charm to it. Right? It's not as clear and defined as that. But this cloudiness also is a very charming thing. So, this repetition thing, right? And the exaggerated sense of one of the notes in it. I'm exaggerating it, so it will sound a little artificial, but basically, these kind of repetitions. So the idea of repeating a phrase and then creating a kind of a pattern out of it. For example, suppose at the Rishabha, so that this way of ideating, I think the originator of this kind of, and this comes, everybody sings this in so many different ragas, especially in Melakarta ragas, Sampurna ragas. This is a very beautiful and lilting portion, you know. So in terms of ideation, even here, where the emphasis lies, it's not that. That sa ri ga ri ga ri sa. So everything, the magic of that phrase itself is the modulation, you know. And also, I was speaking about the accentuation of the anuswaras in a raga like Kannada, for example. Here also the quick briga. That pamamaga is that sa, ni, that sa in between is an anuswara. It's supposed to be graceful and a incidental thing, not pronounced thing. But he used to create magic by pronouncing it. Right? Pronouncing the sa. And the bowing was so complete in terms of what it could express. The cuts within the phrase. For ni pa ga, ni pa, instead of that continuity, he used to cut it. And you see that kind of excitement also. Instead of that, here also, ni, sa, ri, instead of that, an efficient way. So one can go on and on about all these small things which constitute Lalgudi Sar's Bani. But essentially, like I said, it moved the music, especially instrumental music, because of its lack of the expressiveness of the Sahitya. So he could very effectively compensate that by theatre within the notes, by theatre within the phrases of the raga and the ordering of the phrases, and create that sense of drama and variety within it. Time is not sufficient for me to go into many other of his creative genius in terms of how he fashioned an alapana, how he could play an alapana, a very complete alapana in 1 minute and 2 minutes, or play it for 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes also. So, just a glimpse is all we can do within this short time into the Bani. Like I said, Bani is only a pathway. The greats of music show us possibilities of, if you take this way, where will it lead you to? Bani is not about imitation. Bani is about following the pathway along with your own musicianship. So we celebrate Lalgudi Sar's this mighty musical genius's 90th anniversary, and I'm extremely happy to be a part of it. And both GJRKrishnan and Viji are very good friends, and we share a rapport within music and outside it also. I have had the good fortune of playing with GJRKrishnan on many occasions as jugalbandis and duets, and He's a good example of a follower of a Bani in terms of not just playing it as his father played, as his father and Guru played, but in terms of taking the essential core elements and making it part of his own musicianship. That's how a Bani needs to be. Thank you for this opportunity. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste.